All right, welcome back to a bonus episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, let me tell you what we're doing right now. We're getting ready to release some of the archive that we found from when we were the sci-fi shenanigans. We're going to get those up there for the posts that were brought down. We thought you might enjoy them, and so without further ado, let us roll that beautiful. Oh wait, they're going to sue me. Play it.
Hey, all you crazy sci-fi fans! Time for your daily dose of insanity over here at the Sci-Fi Shenanigans podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions. A place where the sky's the limit, space is a place, and nerds run the world. And without further ado...
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Sci-Fi Shenanigans podcast. Today, instead of our normal one-on-one author interview, we have gathered a panel of experts in the field of space opera, and they are... Well, you know what? Let me just read what I wrote, and I can pretend I've done this before. So today we've gathered some authors from the vast array of modern space opera greatness to host a panel on the various facets of the subgenre. We'll let the guests answer in alphabetical order, and if that is not alphabetical order enough for you, Terry, I blame the fine wording of word perfect, and it is not my fault, so bite your tongue.
I blame our education system.
Well, what Word Perfect does, I think, is they just took the first letter of the first name and they went with it. And I was too lazy to sort it individually. So, hush.
Is Word Perfect still a thing?
Yes, it is. Do you sing the ABCs?
Bite your tongue.
You know, that's easy. That's only 4 names to alphabetize my last name.
You hush. All of you. All of you will. I will get you all. I will haunt you down.
Obviously, you've never had to fix the bookstore shelves.
You know what? You're all fired. You're all voted off my island. But okay, so in somewhat of an alphabetical-ish order, why don't we introduce the listeners to you fine, crazy people? So who are you and what kind of stuff do you write and wow your audience with? And we'll start with Amy.
Hi, I am Amy DuBoff, and I am first regardless of how we're doing this with the panel. So so my readers dubbed me the Queen of Space Opera a few years back. I write space opera, and we're going to get into that subject a little bit later of what that exactly is. I like to write the sci-fi stuff. It tends to be a little bit more on the space fantasy side rather than military sci-fi. Woo! And I have a few book series out. My main flagship is the Catechol series, and that is now an expanded universe, and I have several co-authors working with me. I also have recently released a book in the Aeon 14 universe with M.D. Cooper, and I have a standalone Dark Stars trilogy that's more of a YA space fantasy.
All right, so we're going to ignore Mixon. He doesn't exist. So J. Daniel Sawyer.
I'm J. Daniel Sawyer. I'm J. Daniel Sawyer. I write hard geopolitical and sociological science fiction, sometimes very serious, such as my podcast series, The Antithesis Progression, sometimes very comical, like my series, Suave Rob's Awesome Adventures. And I also do a series of mysteries called the Clark Lantham Mysteries. So I'm all over the place, but my focus is generally on hard sociology and geopolitics and economics, as well as interesting characters.
But you're also very well read, so which makes you the perfect guest.
If you insist.
All right. And next, but not least, we have Joe Vasicek. Did I get it right on the pronunciation?
You did. That's correct. It's Vasicek, like cash a check.
Damn, I wish I had that name.
I'm just surprised I'm not
last. Now you've got to explain to all the kids what a check is.
There you go. A check is, well, I don't know. What's a check? That's also what...
I had to teach my NCO in the Army how to write a check. And he couldn't understand why I had no respect for him. And then when he tried giving the class on how to budget, I'm like, do you need me to teach you?
Well, you know what you call a
Wait, we do this like on paper?
you know what you call a skydiving accident in Prague?
What's that?
You call it a bounced check.
Oh, nice.
There you go.
All right.
So I'm just surprised I'm not last. Anyways, my name is Joe Vasicek. I write a lot of science fiction. I've got a lot of books out there. Probably the biggest ones right now, there's Star Wanderers is a series of novellas I wrote, and Sons of the Starfarers is kind of a spin-off from that. My most recent release was Edenfall. It's book 2 in the Genesis Earth trilogy. I wrote Genesis Earth about 10 years ago, and first thing I published, and finishing up the trilogy only took me 10 years to get to that. So
You're doing faster than George R. Martin.
That is true. I'm averaging more words per day than George R. Martin, which is not difficult.
I think my Dutch Shepherd edges more words per day than George R. R. Martin.
Good boy. There you go.
All right. And finally, Mr. I'm going to complain about the alphabet, Terry Mixon.
Complain may be a little bit too rough, but are you really complaining about something when you explain it to somebody that's a little slow on picking up how it works?
You know what? They say gentlemen go last without complaining.
Terry's not a gentleman.
I am absolutely not a gentleman.
Well, there we go.
I'm Terry Mixon, and coincidentally enough, I write space opera. So that's always good. I'm probably best known for writing in the Empire of Bones saga that I write that is far future, that is very space opera-ish. That's it.
Odds or Ciscas after you just made fun of me.
That was number 5. The next one is number 6. That would be even, and that is you.
No,
I'm glad you were here to explain it to him. JR's a little slow.
Wow.
He was
How did
the
I go off the
infantry.
rails? This I was. I could shoot really, really good. I shoot good.
Okay, so I will help JR out now. Now that you've defined who's speaking, JR went over to the fine folks at Wikipedia University to see how to define the term. And so I'm going to read his report.
Odds
what?
is 5. Odds is 5. Evens is 6. And you make fun of me? Jimmy,
you know what?
You're the one with the advanced math degree.
I don't have an advanced math degree. I have an advanced chemistry degree.
It's mathish. Come on.
That does involve some level of math.
You're losing ground here, JR. Just move along, JR. Just move along, buddy.
All right. Well, then I will see odds.
And we know Chris is going to put all of this in there. Okay.
He absolutely is.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Can you handle the odds? Or do you want me to get it?
I am odd, so I'll do odds. Sorry. Next, we'll define our terms. What is space opera? Again, in the alphabetical order by first name that JR listed them all in. Ladies go first. Amy?
All right. So I think of space opera is the first thing that comes to mind is really big scope. And obviously it has to be something in space. So I think if it only takes place on a planet and you don't have any spaceships going between worlds or just floating out there in the black, then it is, it's not in the space opera thing.
I really like your definition that you include that space has to be involved, not just another planet. Like that.
Right? Yeah, I mean, so something earthbound, you don't have any travel other planets. No, not space opera.
Well, you know, Pern never went to another planet by Anne, so.
Would anyone define Pern as space opera?
I would call it.
No, I would define it as science fiction. It is science fiction, though. But so I was saying I like their definition because it included that you go to other planets. So I was complimenting her, guys. Daniel.
I think Pern was like fantasy that was written in a time when space opera was really ascendant.
No, it was not. It was science fiction. Very clearly
definitely
written as science fiction.
Yeah.
No, but
it couldn't be science fantasy.
But it was written during an era.
It is science fiction.
It was written during an era when I think, science fiction and space opera was more ascendant than fantasy. So she kind of threw in a little more science fiction elements into it. At least that's kind of what the impression I've got.
She dumped some fantasy tropes in there, but it's definitely science fiction.
Okay.
She has a freaking computer in genetic engineering. Daniel?
Yes. Definition of space opera: I look for stories that have a scope and investment that's rather operatic in nature. So, rise and fall of empires and governments, power struggles, that kind of stuff. Also in space.
Joe?
Well, I think of space opera as kind of basically epic fantasy set in space. Except it's not epic fantasy; it has its own tropes, but it's more on the side of like big, large empires and quests and things like that. But it's definitely got more of a science fiction edge to it. So it has its own set of tropes that's unique from epic fantasy, but it's not like hard science fiction where it has to follow a lot of rules and stuff. You can actually have magic, which FTL is basically just another form of magic, and yeah.
You need not the long paragraphs of telling me how a missile works. I like that.
Well, I can have that too.
I don't like the long paragraphs of telling me how a missile works. I don't care how a missile works. And the not a gentleman, but Terry will still go last. Terry.
I think my opinion of it is a mix of Amy's and Joe's interpretation. I agree with both of what they said. I just want to mix it all together and say yes to both of them.
So, yes is his definition.
Okay, you're going to have to go ahead and work with us here, JR. People have gone before. The listeners can mix it all together.
That's kind of cheating.
Is it? I believe that space opera is, like Amy said, it's something with a grand scale. It has to take place in space. There is the grand adventure element. But I also believe, very much like what Joe said, that the epic fantasy flipped around is very similar to what space opera is. It's not epic fantasy, but it does have its own tropes, and it's very similar to epic fantasy in its own way. That's what I think.
I think the biggest similarity is the grand scheme of everything.
Well, if you're going to go that way, then family saga and historical fiction both belong in the same family, which actually works out really well for my definition as well.
Yeah, I could see that.
Okay. All right,
I figured you'd be more of a Bio of a Space Tyrant kind of guy there, Dan.
Oh, I love Bio of a Space Tyrant, but I also
it's a great series.
Oh, it really is. I also love Dune, and I also love, and for the same reasons, I love family sagas like Ken Follett stuff. What the fuck is that?
That's somebody's phone going off.
Oh.
I didn't even know it was there. Excuse me as I smother it.
Like Ken Follett stuff and Herman Wouk stuff. For me, that's all sort of a piece, so I approach space opera looking through that kind of a lens.
I like the Empire of Silence series by Chris Reduccio from DaW. It's very much Dune-esque in that aspect. And it is actually the Bio of a Tyrant, the first book.
Nice.
It starts off with, let me tell you why I'm here in my jail cell, because I destroyed an entire solar system type thing.
They had it coming. Now that we've defined our terms, I went to the fine folks over at Wikipedia University, where all the great degrees are from, to see how they defined it. So here's what they had to say. Space opera is a subgenre of science fiction that emphasizes space warfare, melodramatic adventure, interplanetary battles, chivalric romance, and risk-taking set mainly or entirely in outer space. It usually involves conflict between opponents possessing advanced abilities, futuristic weapons, and other sophisticated technology. The term has no relation to music, but is instead a play on the terms soap opera and horse opera, the later of which was coined during the 1930s to indicate the cliched and formulaic Western movies. Space operas emerged in the 1930s and continued to be produced in literature, film, comics, television, and video games. So it sounds like you guys were hitting around the corner on all of those definitions.
It also sounds like it's something the WB would put on TV. Melodramatic
the WB has done a couple of really wild science fiction soap operas, but they've all been earthbound, like Kyle XY and Meet John Doe and stuff like that.
The 100.
The 100 was great.
Good. The book first.
I could never get into the 100.
Didn't they also do the 4400, or was that a different network?
No, that was USAA.
Oh, okay.
But I love Krypton.
Wait. USAA is the insurance company for veterans.
Sorry, USA.
Or the finance company for veterans. Oh, USA now. Okay.
She was just chanting with the echo.
No, I'm just stupid.
All right, next question's yours, Cisca.
Do you guys agree with this definition, or are you sticking with your own answers?
Yeah, I really like this definition personally.
What?
I really like this definition personally. I think that it really gets at that the scope thing, but there's also so like Star Wars is kind of the quintessential space opera in a lot of ways. That's the one people point to, and it has sort of that melodramatic element to it, and looking at that the hero's journey arc and the dash of romance and the pew-pewing stuff going on. So I think that this kind of definition is a good characterization.
I like it quite well, but I think it's a bit disparaging, especially when you get into some of the more adult space operas. Soap opera tropes just don't apply to something like Stephen R. Donaldson's The Gap Cycle.
Yeah.
But is that really space opera?
Oh, God, yes. I mean, the whole thing is literally based on Wagner's Ring Cycle.
Yeah, I think I think it's pretty close. I think space opera is I don't think it's quite as rigid as some genres in terms of like what it is. There's a lot of room to play with it. And I think the interesting thing that Wikipedia points out is that it was originally like a derogatory term, like, oh, that's just like soap opera, space opera, horse opera, a bunch of fat ladies singing and, I don't know. But then it's kind of like, we basically just kind of owned it and we're like, yeah, that's what we like. And just trying to turn it into whatever we wanted it to be. So, yeah.
Don't geeks do that normally?
Pretty much, yeah. Like geek is a positive term now, and it used to be like, oh, you're such a geek,
I just look at people and go, your point is like saying I'm tall or my last name is small. It's a fact.
So, what about you, Terry?
Terry?
I agree with the definition there, too. My vision of what is space opera is very all-encompassing. I'm willing to accept a lot of things as space opera.
So you're not a purist?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay. So are there any subtropes that you must have in the story for it to be classified as space opera? Amy?
I think that one of the elements that I like to see in there is some kind of intrigue. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the highest political level, but there needs to be some kind of secret plot going on in there. I also like to see some sort of teamwork element going on, of kind of that group coming together to take on something that's bigger than themselves, and sort of the underdog taking on the big thing, whatever that may be.
So the quest vibe.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Dan?
Other than it being in space, I think space opera kind of needs to have a sort of, this is going to sound a little geeky, but a sort of multi-layer mirroring where the personal passions are driving the larger elements of the plot in a way that's a lot more tightly connected than you get, say, in adventure fiction or something. And I think for me, that's the defining quality of space opera, is that the personal passions projected onto the universe in a really big way.
Okay. Joe?
That's a very interesting point. I can definitely see that. I think space opera, humanity, if your characters are humans, and in most space opera they are, or if they're aliens, they have to be a multi-planet species. But I don't think that's sufficient, because I think we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer to that. Like, I think of like Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. I'm not sure how. I mean, I've only read Red Mars. I'd say that's more like hard SF, but it's because the more we advance technologically, the closer we become to, what was space opera before is now trending into more hard SF or near future SF. I think humanity's got to be a multi-planet species, and it's got to be somewhere in the mid-future or the far future.
Okay. And what about you, Terry?
I think that there has to be a sense of adventure. Obviously, it's not a requirement, but I think space opera is much better if it has that same feel, like Star Wars is a grand adventure. If you've got an adventure element going on there where your character is on the grand journey, then you're definitely in the space opera territory. And if you're lacking it, maybe you're not writing really space opera. Maybe it's a different kind of science fiction. I'm not sure.
Mind if I push back on you on that one?
Well, absolutely.
Dune does not have an adventure in it, and it is one of the giants of space opera.
I think Dune is the adventure.
I think that may actually be correct.
This they're going to a completely new planet, and they're going out and trekking across the desert. I mean, I'd argue that has
okay. Well, yeah. I mean, they do a lot of adventurous things, but it's not an adventure story. You know,
no, but
it's very tightly bound sociological stuff. Oh, structurally, okay.
I agree.
I misunderstood.
We're just talking structurally. I'm not trying to make it. The question was subtropes, and this is if you.
Gotcha.
I think you need to have some adventurous elements in it,
for
it to be space opera. Because if there's no adventure, I'm not sure that it actually is space opera.
Yeah,
gotcha.
If everyone's just sitting in a boardroom.
My apologies, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Well, I think most books these days have to have an adventure element, or people. We kind of like our books as action packed as we've taken to liking our movies. I think.
Yeah.
So, Amy, you were talking and. Joe's big booming voice was talking over you, so we missed what you had to say.
Oh, I was just saying that they go to this whole other planet. They're trekking through the desert and meeting like alien creatures. I mean, I would argue that that's a pretty adventurous thing.
Okay.
Dune, in my opinion, is like the most. I just read it for the third time, and Dune is, in my opinion, the most perfect science fiction book ever written. My wife disagrees with that, but. I don't know.
But she gets points for having read it.
Yeah, it's true. It's sure. It's Lord of the Rings.
My
opera.
bar as a spouse may be set low, but that's my problem. So, but what about? Why did you give me romance, JR? What about romance? Wiki mentioned that one, as well as chivalric romance, and anyway, so that you can. What do you feel about it having a romantic subplot? And I guess, does it have to be clean romance? Since JR educated me on what clean romance is, we're including that in the question.
I don't think it's a absolute must, but I think it's a more often than not, there's some kind of romantic element to space opera. But I don't think that not having that would completely cut it out of being in the genre. And I certainly like having some romance in mine personally.
I do too.
Well, I've joked before that I'm allergic to it, so.
Well, there's another. I tend to agree, but there's another sense too. A chivalric romance is actually a particular medieval and late and early modern literary genre that isn't just about the wooing of the romantic interest, but it's about the achieving of the status to be worthy of the interest of the romantic prospect. And that's an element that is in space opera, even in space operas that don't have a contemporary romantic sort of romance.
Yeah, I think, there's romance and there's romance. Like there's romance, when we use the term, we're thinking usually like love stories and that sort of thing.
Right.
The old term, like it used to be that basically everything that was kind of that was adventure or that was fiction kind of fell under this kind of, before they had really clear genre delineations. Romance was kind of a lot of things fell under the term of romance. And I think there might be a little bit of a throwback to that because space opera is one of the older subgenres of science fiction. And science fiction, I think it really began with Frankenstein, and you had the 19th century stuff, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and
and those were called scientific romances at the time.
Exactly. And I think that's so a lot of at that time, like all these genres, which we've since delineated out, a lot of them were still sharing tropes, and I think that's where space opera kind of got more of its kind of romantic edge to it, where it's not just about like a boy, a girl, or a girl and a girl, a boy. I don't know, but like two, or an alien and a human, they fall in love with each other. But it's also striving to be worthy or striving to attract that kind of a person. So,
and also larger than life was the element that all of those old romances had in common, whether they were love stories or not. There was something larger than life about either the aspirations or the storytelling or the world or something.
Mm-hmm. And you read it, they'd read these kind of stories because they want to feel an emotion. Like,
yes,
we want to, and that's a lot of it. So it's a lot of it tied up in the sense of wonder right there. So it's not just a sense of wonder at the grandeur of the universe, but it's also a sense of wonder at, wow, these are really amazing people and I love them.
Yes.
Or these are really horrible people and I hate them.
Yeah.
I agree with Joe a lot in this. I think that besides the capital romantic issues that are very important to space opera, I like a little bit of actual romance in the stories, but I don't think it's required. I don't think that it's necessarily something that has to be in something to make it a space opera.
I think what might be more important than having a love story in there is having people come together at some point and be kind of find some kinship, and that could potentially be a friendship rather than a love interest. But there's that idea of coming together to be stronger as one unit rather than just one individual.
Like
very much, yeah.
Okay.
It's like a sense of brotherhood, but men and women. It's right. One of those things of coming together.
Universal brotherhood, yeah.
You can have a really crappy romance and still be a good space opera, like Dune.
That's true.
The romance in Dune is basically it's like, I saw the future and we're fated to be together. Yes, let's be together.
But I got to marry someone else for political reasons.
Exactly. Yeah.
Horrible pickup line.
It is
well, thanks for
inevitable.
telling me.
Hey, let's hook up and have a child that becomes a worm god.
Pretty much.
All right.
I double dare you to try that in a bar. We'll wait.
Oh, okay. You're on.
I would pay to
Next
see you try that at
convention.
Dragon Con. Which one?
Wait, it doesn't count if he uses it on Kitty.
No,
I would
no.
see you try it at Dragon Con.
Well, if I ever make it to Dragon Con, I'll try it there.
Apply to be a guest. That's the best way to make it.
I have to be able to afford to go. I'm in the middle of building a house. That's a bit expensive.
Yeah.
Those Larry Correa. What's your point?
No, Larry Correa is Larry Correa. So
Larry Correa not didn't only he bought a mountain. Larry Correa did.
I know. It's awesome.
Yes.
Nice.
We all need a mountain castle, I agree. But so the definition also mentioned the military aspects of things. So just how important is it to stay on point with things like the military rankings, technology, tactics, etc., separate from the genre that is military science fiction?
I think the technology aspect is more important than the military aspect, because you might be working with a completely alien culture that might have a military scheme or not have a military that's just completely unlike anything you would see on Earth in the traditional sense. So I like to have a clear separation between space opera and military sci-fi. There's a lot of overlap between them when you're talking about the space fleet and space marine stuff, but I think that they are distinct genres, and then there's that overlap in the Venn diagram. So I don't think that having a military component is necessary in what's going on in the story, but I think that there is always some kind of military element that is happening somewhere in the universe, even if it's just there are these enforcer people that are out there that people might be needing to be on the lookout for, but I don't know that you really need to have a military officer on your cast of main characters to be considered space opera.
Okay. Dan?
I think Amy's onto something. I think that you don't actually need the military per se involved, but you do, but something related to that general area of life, either military or diplomacy or a war going on in the background or something dealing with large-scale political shifts, is important to having space opera really be space opera.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is because it's not just like space opera is not just about, the lives of these private people and they're going and doing their private things, although it can focus on that. But there's also an element of empires and kingdoms and large groups of people, clashing and everything, and which is where I kind of think where the kind of the opera part comes from. And the way that large groups of people clash is usually through armed conflict. So I think when we get out and we make first contact with another species, we're going to find out that we're actually the Klingons. So
I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Yeah, that could work.
Yeah.
The Klingons were kind of the weak link species in Star Trek. Like they're these, bad mama jamas, and then every time they invade the Enterprise, who is it that's getting their butt kicked? The Klingons by some like 5'2" nothing female with no training who was yesterday like working in the bake shop, and suddenly she's kicking the Klingons. But like, no, those are not what I would consider an example of a good warrior race.
That does not happen.
They're like the Barney Fife of warrior race.
They did survive better than some of them, though. I mean,
but yeah.
But I think
I sense that JR has a little bias here.
Well, Star Trek is also basically just, what like a communist future looks like. So there you go. It's a communist wet dreams. That's Star Trek.
But to be completely serious about the point, the reality is that any species that makes it out to become a multiplanetary or galactic species is going to be an apex predator. And so the bumping of species into each other, even if they eventually make peace, is going to be rather like the bumping of empires into each other on Earth. It's going to be bloody and nasty and really, really dire.
Well, and I think a lot of the military stuff also came from Star Trek, because Star Trek was something that really popularized it. And, Star Trek isn't really, you can't really say it's military science fiction. It's not, it's kind of, there's a lot of, issues with it there, but they had like the whole military structure and everything, because the Federation is, expanding and exploring all these.
Well, I think it's gotten a lot more. I think Star Trek started kind of military that, and then got back towards it, because you had the war with the Dominion.
The Star Trek military culture is very much the Bretton Woods World Order American military culture. It's there to keep the seas open and keep brush fire wars down. It's not.
I actually thought that they were like the Coast Guard in space.
Well, that's essentially what the U.S. Navy was for the last 80 years.
Police actions as opposed to actual wars. Yeah.
But you actually had like the war with the Dominion, which was glorious.
Yes, it was glorious.
How prepared were they for that when it started?
I've heard.
You know what? The Defiant fucking rocks. Just shush.
All I'm going to say is that the Honorverse is what Star Trek wants to be when it grows up.
Yes, it does. With lots of missiles, obviously.
There you go.
And plenty more meetings to make themselves feel
obviously there you cannot have fewer than 10,000 missiles in the honor and anything in the Honorverse for it to count as military.
Roll pods.
Just ask David.
So what about you, Terry? We don't want to skip you. Maybe they do, but
oh, sure you do. By the way, I just want to say that if you ever get into space, you're more like possums in space, JR.
Okay. Go on.
Which means you won't know that he's not. Which means you won't know he's not dead till you get right near him and he bites your face off.
That's exactly how it's going to work.
And he's diving into your dumpster.
He's not an apex predator. He's more like a trash panda.
All right. I'll take that. Keep going.
He's like Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy. All right.
Except that he's not quite as coordinated as that. You have to meet him to know for sure, but trust me on this. I think that space opera doesn't have to have military in there, but I agree that it has to have the advanced technology. If you look at Star Wars, the Rebellion was definitely not a military force. They did some fighting, but they were whatever was scraped up from wherever they could find it. And that absolutely works. I'm sorry, what'd you say, JR?
They were terrorists that used child soldiers.
There you go.
Shut up.
Let's throw him out of here.
All I'm saying is that, sometimes the Emperor just got to put your boot down to get stuff done.
You know what? The Emperor had to use clones because they couldn't figure out how to have any game.
Oh.
Okay. But he got stuff done. Well, if you read the
my 6-year-old can get stuff done. That's not something to brag about.
But that's before the mouse ruined it. And,
oh God! Anyway, don't get me started.
So you think the military technology has to be there, but the main characters in your story don't necessarily have to be military.
I don't even know that it is to be military technology. The technology to wage war in a futuristic fashion is a big part of it, whether you're talking just using lightsabers to fight somebody on a one-to-one nature, or you've got a Star Destroyer trying to bombard a planet. You've got to have whatever it takes to take the futuristic fight to whatever your enemy is. That's what it needs.
So I'm skipping 11 because we already answered 11.
Oh, we did. You're right.
Yes. What level of details do you need for it to be space opera? Do you have to have technical specs for ships? Do you need to cover travel times? Can you just wave your hands and have FTL and teleportation?
So I think that space opera varies widely in this regard. For my own personal taste, the main thing I want is internal consistency in the universe. I don't necessarily need to know all of the aspects of how things work, but I just want there to be consistency in how things do work. So if you have either the transit time is always variable, or it's going to take a certain amount of time to get to different locations. And I don't need to have that spelled out for me all the time, but I just want to know that the author at least is tracking it in their head and be able to get that as a reader. In terms of the technical specs on spaceships, I just want it to know enough that as a reader, I can create that environment in my head. I don't need to know the exact speed that everything can go and all of its equipment loadout. I think that goes more into the military sci-fi and the hard sci-fi stuff. I think space opera can be a lot looser with those things, but you just need to set enough groundwork that the reader knows what is possible and what is not possible. So when you go to break a rule for some reason because they get this cool new tech that allows you to break a rule, you just need to have established that that is in fact something that they're breaking and isn't just a given in the universe.
For a perfect example of how not to do this, look at what J.J. Abrams did with the transporters in Star Trek Into Darkness.
Oh my heck.
No. I really don't like Abrams' Star Trek. I mean,
Me
yes,
neither.
It's beautiful and Chris Pines is great to watch, but I really don't like it.
Let's just leave the Academy and command a starship. Here we go.
Yeah, really.
You know what? You just need to go back to the Emissary. The days of the Emissary were much better.
Yes. I think the most important element for the construction of any galactic empire is handwavium. I personally like to do hard SF space opera because for me it's more interesting to write. But I mean, space operas are all over the place, and as long as there's internal consistency to the universe, the reader will accept anything. And the point of the space opera is not the technical details; it's the immense, edifying scope of what's going on. It's that sense of bigness that you get going through these characters that are engaging in grand events and living out their deepest passions and facing their greatest fears and affecting the course of the universe in the process. The technical details are strictly incidental.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of that. I agree with Amy and Dan. I think there's a lot of handwavium, and the thing is, you can write a space opera that doesn't have a whole lot of technical stuff, or that kind of just hand waves all over the place. The question is, do you want to write a good space opera? And the thing is,
why would you want to write a bad one?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean,
there's a market for them. I mean, have you seen the shit that makes it on the streaming services?
Dude, there's a market for anything. Dinosaur pornography is a thing in books. There's a market for anything. Why would you want to write a bad one?
Yep. I don't know, but there's a few tricks. One of the things about writing bad ones, yes, there you go. Or at least hiding how bad it actually is. There's a few tricks, but no, I think one of the things is you're writing stuff that is so out there. It's like future. It's like in the space. There's all kinds of stuff. There's aliens. I mean, so what you want to do, I think a lot of the technical stuff can really help to ground it. Especially what you do is a lot of space opera starts with a big lie. Like the big lie is we have faster than light travel, but then because you have one big lie, you can't have two big lies. You have to have one big lie, right. And then everything else has to kind of follow from that, which is why you get down to a lot of, well, if this is how we have faster than light, but this is how it works. And we're going to detail it down to the very technical level so that we can have it function that way. So I don't know. There we go. I just had a brain fart. So anyways.
That makes sense. We'll go with that.
Okay. No, and then the other thing is also, and I remember now, the other thing is that you want a lot of space opera and a lot of science fiction in general. You will explain one small thing in great detail, and then kind of that gives you space to basically hand wave a really huge thing. This is more from the writing end of things than it is from the reading end of things, but you'll find that if the author makes you describe something in such detail that you believe that it exists, that builds trust. So then when the author basically glosses over, and then they went and the spaceship did this thing, then you're like, oh, that's believable because it feels believable because this other thing was described in such detail.
Okay. Terry?
For me, I am not a very technical specs kind of person. As long as I give my ships class names so that they have a relative size, the relative one's faster than the other, one's better armed than the other, that's good enough for what I do. As far as travel times, I keep them very general. So my story has to be loose enough to accommodate the travel times, which to get from one part of a solar system to a different solar system might take days. I have to go ahead and have my story structured in a way that that's not going to be a problem. If it was, then I'd have to write my stories in a different way. I'd have to structure it differently.
It occurred to me when it comes to the hand wavium, Star Trek II had a wonderful line that sort of distills down what I think is essential in space opera. Kirk says, you have to understand why things work on a starship. And if you can convey to your audience why things work in the story the way they do in a good enough sense, then you've got a tremendous amount of flexibility on how much technical detail you give here or there, as long as they get the gestalt and get it very clearly.
Okay. So now that we've got the broad strokes of what makes good, or what is space opera, let's talk about what makes good, bad, or great space opera, which you guys started hinting at but didn't answer, so we get to ask. And we'll start with Amy. What do you think makes space opera truly rise above?
I think it's when you're able to bring all of the elements together in a way that feels completely seamless. So a lot of things will emphasize one of the elements. Either it's pretty militaristic, or it has this really great hero's journey, or there's this really nice character development arc with coming together as a team or romance. But if you can get all of those things working together completely seamlessly, those are the ones that really stand out. And the really bad ones just don't really do any of those things well. It's throwing too many things together, but they're not integrated in a way that feels natural.
So it's got all the ingredients, but none of the soul.
Right.
Okay. All right. What about you, Dan?
I think that the best space opera happens when the story itself has immense mythic depth, and everything else in the story serves to reinforce that, works together like a symphony. It doesn't matter how many elements you've got, as long as they are all plucking on the same mythic leitmotifs and reinforcing each other so they feel like an integrated whole.
That was a much more eloquent way of saying what I was trying to say.
I agree. And that's very short. But anyways, no, I would add, I agreed with all that. And I would add that, a lot of other genres of fiction, they will have larger than life character. Like the characters will be so large that they're a little bit unbelievable because of the setting. They take place in a believable setting. Like in a lot of thriller or a lot of like romance and stuff, you'll have it'll take place in this world in a real place. And so the character will be like some kind of a crazy, ex-Navy SEAL who does all these crazy things, or it'll be like this hunky guy or this really hot babe or something like that. And so the people will be more will be a little bit more loose, like a little more unbelievable. But I think because space opera takes place in worlds that are so far removed from our known reality, the really great space opera grounds it by having characters that feel like real people that you can really fall in love with and really really feel really close to. And I think that's where it overlaps a lot with epic fantasy, because it's the same thing. You have this, it's a genre that really focuses on the sense of wonder. You have these crazy, fantastic worlds, this magic and everything, but you have to have characters that, like, none of that will feel believable if the characters are also, crazy, and off the wall. They have to actually feel like, no, this is a real person that I could sit down with and chat with and be a really close friend with, or a really big enemy with. I don't know, but yeah.
Okay, Terry.
I think that what makes for really great space opera is having heart in the story. You've got to really make the readers care about what happens to those characters. You've got to have great characters, even if they're just regular, everyday people that are having to struggle against almost unconquerable odds. You've got to have that heart in there so that the readers are rooting for you, that are right behind you. That's what you need. And if you don't have that, you're going to fall a little short.
Okay. Next question is yours, Cisca.
Before you do that,
it's going to disagree with me. Oh, no.
No. It's just that as everyone else was talking, it occurred to me that there's one other quality of great space opera that I always look for. It shows up in Deep Space Nine and Dune and Babylon 5. They're the kinds of stories that when they close, they stay with you because they have shown you something about life or the mysteries of the universe or yourself that sticks with you for years. They open up a sphere of consciousness that you can't get to any other way.
That'd be Ender's Game.
Yep. Yeah. Ender's Game would be that kind of story too.
But I would think particularly with the three of them that you mentioned, for me, when they closed, it was this sense of completion. Like that was just perfect. Yes. And that's really hard to get. Very hard to get. But we actually, so are we all done? Because one of our listeners submitted a really great question, and I'd love to ask you guys it.
Okay.
Sure.
How much of the galactic government has to be included to fit the genre? In other words, could the entire story be about a cook at a fast food joint without involving any government agencies, cops, officers, and still be space opera?
Yes. Nathan Lowell writes these.
Oh, yeah.
I still think you have to have the space travel aspect of it, though. So it can't just take place only in the kitchen. But it could certainly be a person who works as a cook in a kitchen on a spaceship. I think the important aspect of the galactic government needs to just be that backdrop to set the tone for what's going on in the broader universe, and have some kind of personal relationship between that main character and how they feel about what's going on.
Okay. Good answer.
Who's that guy from, what was it, in Voyager? The guy who's like the morale officer, the guy who's basically the cook.
Neelix,
yes.
Neelix, yeah.
There you go. You could write a story entirely from Neelix's point of view, and that would be exactly that, and it would be very much space opera.
I think they did a couple
Nathan Lowell's
episodes.
Golden Age of the Solar Clipper, which is one of the most beautiful space operas ever written, is all about just an ordinary workman struggling his way through the merchant marines.
Or then one that I really liked, it's a little older, is Merchanter's Luck by C.J. Cherry, which is basically, and that's kind of more, it's more like, it's space opera, and it also kind of overlaps with science fiction romance, but it's basically like, there's this whole, universe and everything, this whole universe, the down below universe and everything else, the Alliance, Union universe. She basically just wrote a story that's basically a love story about a guy who gets on the spaceship of this, this merchanter and how it works out. So, yeah.
Okay. What about you, Terry?
I think that you only have to have as much of the galactic government as you need to set the tone of the story that you're trying to tell. It doesn't have to be a political thriller to be space opera. In fact, I think that if it was a political thriller, that might detract from the experience. So whatever it takes to set the tone and to set up the conflict, that's how much you need.
Okay. So now let's look at the genre writ large. So do you guys think we are in a boom period for space opera or a bubble about to pop? And Amy, you can go first.
I think the space opera genre is only going to continue to grow now that humans are actually legitimately looking to begin more space travel. I can only see that level of imagination continuing to expand.
Okay. What about you, Dan?
I agree that it's only going to get better, but I've got a different reason. We're moving into a world for the next generation or two that is far more multipolar and multilateral, and so the kinds of Game of Thrones shit that used to be normal throughout history are getting to be normal again, and people will gravitate towards space opera because it's a way to explore and understand how these things work without having to read the news.
Okay. The way to explore geopolitics.
There you go. So
I'd say you like social political stuff, so.
He did. What about you, Joe?
So I have this theory that science fiction, at least literary science fiction, is just now coming out of a dark age. I think that...
Amen.
I think that when you look at, like, it went through basically the 80s through most of the aughts. This was kind of a dark age period. You look at histories of science fiction, at least as far as the literary science fiction, like just books. And it starts with the kind of the scientific romance era of the 19th century, and then that gives way to the pulps of the 20s and 30s. You have this explosion of these new magazines and everything. And this is where you get like a lot of like Western became a thing and action adventure. And this is where you get the kind of the, what is it? You get the, like the damsel in distress being kidnapped by a bug-eyed alien, all those kind of covers and stuff. That's the pulp era. And then John Campbell, during his time in the 50s and the 40s and 50s, that's when you really get the golden age. And that's when you have Asimov, Heinlein, and Clarke. And then in the 60s and 70s, there was kind of a pushback against that. And it went from being hard science fiction to being more like social science fiction. And this is when you get the new wave, and you get like Le Guin, and you get also Frank Herbert with Dune and a lot of the other stuff there. And I think after that, literary science fiction actually went into a dark age. And I think that happened because, partially because a lot of the other media were really taking off. Like you have film and movie, you've got, of course, like Star Trek, The Next Generation, you have Star Wars is really taking off, and Terminator and a lot of these other franchises, and people were turning away from books. You also have some really big changes happening in the book industry at the time. You have the rise of the big box stores like Borders and Barnes & Nobles. You have a distributor collapse, which then led to because if most of the books are being sold by Borders and Barnes and Nobles are pushing all the indie booksellers out, they only want to have one distributor nationally that they deal with instead of like all these local ones. And so that pushed out a lot of the local distributors, which then meant that the publishers started consolidating. And so you had this kind of really weird era in publishing as far as books are concerned, and where a lot of it was really more focused around New York. You had a lot more like the editors and agents. If a New York editor or a New York agent didn't understand your book, it wouldn't get published. I think the big exception to that was Bain, because Bain is in North Carolina, and so
Bain's awesome and actually cares about the genre.
Yes,
they do.
And I think what we're seeing right now, I think we've exited that dark age because of the revolutions that are happening in publishing with indie publishing, and I think we are entering into an era of kind of a new pulp era, which is what's happening with the indies, where basically, it's really easy to publish. A lot of people are coming out there, and a lot of really great stuff is coming out. There's also a lot of crap that's coming out, but there's a really big churn of a lot of creative stuff that's coming out there. I think that space opera in the next couple of decades, and science fiction in general, like literary science fiction, is going to go through. There's going to be a lot of creative destruction in the next decade or two. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a lot of new names that are coming out. A lot of old institutions, like a lot of old awards, are going to become more and more relevant. A lot of more older organizations. Some of them will survive.
Well, there's some new awards coming out too. Like there's been the Dragon Award and another thing.
Exactly. So we're seeing new ones come out. Awesome. There's the Goodreads Awards are becoming bigger. USA Today is taking over from the New York Times bestseller list.
So they actually post a real list.
Exactly. Yeah. So
and there's metrics that they use to create it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think all of this
figure data science.
Yeah. And I think all of this is going to lead, as far as what it means for space opera, I think there's going to be a really, I think things are good. I think now has been the best time ever to be a writer or a reader. There's a lot of new stuff coming out and a lot of new opportunities that weren't there before. I think these are going to be good for space opera. I think there is going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of creative destruction, but I think overall things are going to be very good.
Well, and like John Scalzi in an interview called it the golden era of publishing. There's so much, and it's so plentiful, and you can get it in your books in so many different formats.
Mm-hmm. But even in the indie world, there's a lot of chaos too, because there's so you've got Kindle Unlimited with their terms for exclusivity, and then you've got all kinds of other crazy stuff happening. So the question, there's a lot of things happening in the background that maybe readers won't really pay as much attention to because they just want good books. But
I worked at Barnes & Noble for a while, and Kindle Unlimited became the bane of my existence because it was people would come in and go, well, why can't I buy this book?
It's like,
it's Kindle Unlimited, right? Yeah, that means that, they made life suck. Blame Amazon.
And that's Amazon's way of basically trying to corral all these, indie authors into one space and have them just be exclusive to Amazon, so then they can control the content. That there's part of that. There's just partially there. Now, I mean, I don't begrudge anybody, because the thing is, the nice thing being an author is you can write multiple books. So you can have some books in Kindle Unlimited and some not. I mean, you can. There's all kinds of strategies you can follow. But
I'm all for people getting good books out there and getting started and getting to know authors.
Yeah. But point is,
half my life doing that, it seems.
Yeah. But point is, I think there's going to be a lot of chaos that's coming, but I think overall it's going to be really good.
Okay. And Terry, you get to top that.
Well, actually, I think I'm going to continue on with what he's saying there. This is kind of inside baseball for people that aren't authors, but with Kindle Unlimited, there's a large audience of science fiction and space opera readers that are in Kindle Unlimited because they are just whale readers. They want to read everything they can get their hands on. And as somebody that participates in that, 2/3 of my income comes from Kindle Unlimited, which I never saw coming. And so it doesn't do to dismiss it. I wish I could be wide, but I think I actually get more readers coming through Kindle Unlimited than I do otherwise.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I had a reader tell me that they liked the Kindle Unlimited because there is such great disparity between really good and really not so great, as well as and that gave them the chance to try so much that they could really figure out what they liked and what they didn't like, and who was to their taste. Because sometimes somebody may be great and other people may not like them just because it's a different kind of story. So, I mean, I think it's great. More reading, better.
Amy, you started to say something, but I don't think Cisca heard you when she started talking.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation as Terry, that most of my income and readership is through Kindle Unlimited.
Okay. All right, next question is yours, Cisca.
Okay, so we've talked about, one second.
Number 16.
Number 16. Sorry, we switched from odds to evens and we flip-flopped. How is space opera today different from the 80s and 90s? And are those exciting or disappointed? Like, good and the bad of this?
I think probably the biggest change is the amount of diversity in both the racial and gender representations in a lot of the new space opera. I think it's significantly more diverse now than it was during the 80s and 90s. And I think that's representative of the way that the world culture is now. So I think that's a good evolution.
Yeah.
Well, the main difference I see is that there's a lot more quality stuff in print. In the 80s and 90s, I mean, I'm going to piss a lot of people off, but your two best space opera series that started and ended in that era were The Gap Cycle by Donaldson and Bio of a Space Tyrant by Piers Anthony, and a lot of the rest of what was done in the genre was actually done as shared world and licensed science fiction, and it wasn't bad stuff, but nowadays, in addition to there being a much greater diversity in characters, there's a much greater diversity in authors and in really high quality authors doing this genre. And so there's a much richer field to pluck from as a reader.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, those are all very good points. I think another thing is, although I would say that I think Ender's Game is...
Yeah, the quartet.
Is up there.
That's true. That was good. Yeah,
I think that's up there.
That was true.
But I think that as technology has changed, I mean, in the 80s and 90s, we had like the Voyager probes and we had the Pioneer probes and we had the Viking and stuff like that. But we landed Curiosity on the moon. I mean, not on the moon, on Mars. Like we've got all kinds of stuff. The things like we have detailed images of the surface of Titan, which we didn't have like back when I was growing up, like in the 90s. It was like Titan is this mysterious world. We can't penetrate the clouds because we can't see what's there. And now we know it's this really crazy, interesting world. I think what really sets things apart today is that we just know so much more about space and about what's out there. And there's also so many things we don't know, like things like dark matter, dark energy, this kind of thing. But I think that's really impacting things.
Okay. Now that you mention that, another thing that's true now that wasn't is there's now an actual working theoretical warp drive. Whether it could actually be made to work in real life, probably not.
Yeah, the Alcubierre drive.
The Alcubierre drive, yeah.
Yeah.
Something So I seem to remember reading somewhere that they said that for that drive to work, they would have to use more power than the sun will have made in its lifetime.
Yeah, you kind of need the mass energy of Jupiter to get yourself into a warp, at least at this point.
I think they said that you needed exotic matter at the size of Jupiter to make this work.
Oh, I hadn't heard the exotic matter wrinkle.
It's been a while since I've read that article.
The solar system's getting old anyways.
I want to go ahead and expand on something that Joe said. I think that one of the things that's growing isn't just we know more in science, we know more in science fiction. Every science fiction story that you read decade by decade is building on what people have read in the past. So when they started writing space opera back in the 20s, in the pulp era, it was pretty fast and loose. The characterization wasn't that grand. The science was pretty wild. It's what can we imagine? And as decade by decade, we build on what science fiction we've read, it makes us have to step up our game. We have to write better stories. We have to write better characters. We have to write more diverse audiences. We've got to make our stories better than what came before us. At least that's what we should be trying to do. And I think that in a lot of cases, that's what's happening.
I think in the good stories, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
So
that's a good point.
We talked about how it's evolving, and we covered in the question the 80s and 90s because these last few ones are from listeners. So I'm going to tweak the next one since we've talked about how things have changed in the past. How do you think science fiction is going to continue to change as we go forward? And we'll start with you, Amy.
I think there's going to continue to be a move toward more hard sci-fi in space opera as we continue to learn more about the actual scientific theoretical possibilities out there. And I also think that the sociological aspects and the modern themes and culture of having more diverse representation is going to continue to grow.
Okay. Dan?
I think she's right on all of that, and I think the sociological aspects are actually going to get a lot wilder than we've seen. Maybe. Sociological stuff in science fiction has not been very wild or interesting. I hate to say that, but since the culture turned conservative in the 80s, and so I think we're going to see a return to some of the wild sociological stuff that was flitting around in the New Wave era, and that married to the trend toward hard sci-fi and into space opera, like Amy was saying.
So what are you defining as wild sociological stuff as far as talking about playing with cultural norms? Cultural
norms, all sorts of stuff. So if I can be all geopolitical wonky for a sec, the cultural transformation in the 80s wasn't a political one. It was a result. It had a political element, but it was largely a result of a very, very large generation coming of age and becoming wealthy enough that culture across the United States and to a lesser extent across the Western developed world homogenized. And so that which used to be taboo but contemplatable became unthinkable in a lot of areas, not just sexual, but family structure and economic structure and all sorts of things, because the world had a sameness across all of the easily visible parts. And so as a result, the speculative elements in the sociological end of science fiction started to really drain away because the writers had a lot less exposure to the vast diversity of human experience. And I think that as the world has come unglued and become less stable, the curiosity about how adaptable humans really are is going to ramp up, and we're going to see a lot more wild speculation on the sociological side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, you want to follow that?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because what we're living through right now geopolitically is basically the death or at least decline of the neoliberal world order that kind of dominated after the Cold War. We had you had the Soviet Union, the communists lost the Cold War, and we saw the rise of basically this kind of neoliberal order of liberal democracies. And now it's basically a period of cooperation. So yeah, I can see how, because right now a lot of like nationalism is on the rise, globalism is on the decline, which is leading to a lot more of the chaos geopolitically. And I think that is going to influence space opera in some interesting ways. I think that going back to what Amy was saying about diversity, I think indie publishing is a really big boon for diverse authors or authors who might have found it more difficult to get into to get their foot in the door. If there's way more opportunity. Basically, if you can tell a story and people want to hear it, it doesn't matter what your background is or what your race, gender, sexuality, ideology, whether you're an actual alien or a time traveler, you can get your story published. So, and you can, if you can find an audience that way, you can really get big. So, I think that's going to lead to a big boon too for, like indie publishing is really, really friendly towards that.
Okay. And Terry?
I'm going to need you to repeat the question because we went geopolitics and now my brain is thinking geopolitics. And I know that wasn't necessarily quite the question.
So we talked about how the field of science, space opera has evolved over the past 50 years. So how do you think it will continue to change in the next, X number of years?
I think that what's going to happen going forward is that all of the voices that are trying to be told are going to be benefiting from the fact that the algorithms on these stores will find authors that don't necessarily have as great a reach as they think they do. If you like story X, those algorithms are going to be good at saying, then you're probably going to like story Y and the way this person is talking about it. And so it's more of a publishing sort of thing than a writing thing. But I think that whatever type of story you want to tell, you're going to be better able to find your audience.
Okay. All right.
Which doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because indie publishing can be really hard, but it's possible.
All right, we can go with that. Next question is yours, Cisca.
Is it 17 or 18?
We're on 18 because we switched. You skipped 11, remember?
Shush.
JR can't count.
Okay. I had other things pop up in my head. I got distracted. Given how much of the market is covered by science fiction, why are there so few space opera movies out there? Which is funny because I can totally.
That's 19. That's 19.
No, it's 18 on mine.
It's 18 on ours too.
Okay, I don't know why the numbers are different. All right, so then I will ask this question too, so we can get on track. All of us are reading and writing stories.
You hold on now, buddy. Pull back.
But I wanted to talk about one of my favorite B-rated movies.
So I added a question from the audience after I sent you guys your copy, but hers should have updated and dropped. So we've been having that problem with Dropbox with it not syncing. I might have to bite the bullet and learn Google. Ugh.
Well, don't do Microsoft Share Space, whatever they call it. It's not much better.
Just set up an FTP directory on your web server, man. It's easy.
I have no idea what any of that means. We're there. So all of us are reading and writing stories in the English language, but not all of the market happens in English. So what's going on in space opera written in other languages that might be influencing English language space opera coming out in the bookstore near you? Amy?
I must admit to not being very up to date on what's going on in the non-English speaking market right now. I know certainly there's a lot happening in Asia, especially in China with the sci-fi scene, but I am not particularly educated on it myself, I'm afraid to say.
Okay, Dan?
As far as how what's going on in other languages is going to influence the English-speaking market, that influence will come entirely through either translators or people who read the language in question. So, unfortunately, it probably won't come through me because I'm shit at Mandarin and Japanese.
All right, Joe?
Yeah, I can read Arabic, but there's not a whole lot of Arabic science fiction. Although there is some, apparently. But, and then...
I did not.
Yeah, not a whole heck of a lot. But there's... I don't know. I think I'm not as familiar, kind of like Amy and Dan, I'm not that familiar with a lot of the non-English language stuff. I mean, I somewhat speak Arabic, but I'm kind of a hack at it. But I think there's...
You speak more than I do, so...
Yeah, I mean, shway, yani. But
I know enough to get myself in trouble, get along on the playground, and order food.
Alhamdulillah.
That's the important stuff.
No, I don't know.
Right.
No, I don't know. Like, no, but like from what I've heard, from what I've gathered, yeah, China's a real booming field. There's a lot of stuff there. I know back in the day there was a lot of stuff in the old Soviet Union, and I remember I actually I was teaching English in Georgia for a while in 2012, and I remember seeing some of the old, like, you'd see a lot of old Soviet art everywhere. And there's a lot of like space themes and stuff like that. As far as how it's going to influence the English speaking world, I can't really say, not being a huge expert. But I think that the long-term effects of the internet on our culture, and on our world have not yet fully been explored. And I think as the internet brings cultures, like as the internet creates more contact points for cultures to contact each other, I think that's going to create more opportunities for influence there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Terry?
I actually have an opinion on this one. I know, right? I'm going to go ahead and go into the Wayback Machine here and introduce you folks to one of the space opera series that I found when I was growing up. I'm in my middle 50s, and I read what was in the used bookstore when I was growing up. And one of those series was a translation from German for a series called Perry Rodan. It's a serial novella type format that they've been publishing since 1961 that is still going on today. Every week, a new novella comes out set in this space opera universe. And it's something that almost no one outside of Germany knows about because it's German language. I don't know that it's going to influence the United States or the English market. Ace published like the first 116 of them in English. And I read every single one of them when I was a young man. I wish that they kept doing it. I wish that I spoke German. Maybe that's something I need to do there. But space opera is alive and well outside of English.
I think what the result is because there's always been people that spoke multiple languages. I think what you're going to see is the ideas from cultures different than our own are going to start crossing over in ways. You'll see that largely from China because they're largely...
If you read Mona Lisa Foster, she has a space opera one, and she's European descent, and her culture comes across, her native culture, because she's American now, and she'll knife you if you say otherwise. So she's wonderful, but it definitely comes across in the perspective of how she approaches things. So,
but yeah, you're going to see the cross-cultural influences increase if we can stay out of our own way with this. What do they call that? Anyway, the sociology types have a word for it if you're using someone else's culture and you're not exactly whatever you're writing. Appropriation. There we go. If we can get out of our own way with that, you're going to start to see some interesting ideas of what society could look like because we're incorporating worldviews other than our own. I think that's the gist of what
that's not a sociological term. That's a political term. The sociological term is culture.
All right. Fair enough.
No, I just have to say, my ancestors were Viking. And so cultural appropriation was their culture.
I think my family was half Scottish, half German. So we gave the world beer and whiskey. So you're welcome.
Hey, cool.
There you go.
With regards to the internet, remember the most important effect that the printing press had. 400 years of cultural collision and warfare. We're in for some interesting times.
On track.
That's right.
So That was and what do you call it? Adage or whatever. We were studying in world history in high school, and that was "May you live in interesting times." And we asked the teacher to tell us what that meant. And I just remember him sitting there looking all sage, like, "When you understand, you'll hate me." And now I understand, and I hate that son of a biscuit eater.
I hated that phrase when I learned it the first time.
Right. So, all right, let's move on to a happier question. Cisca, 19 on my book, 18 on yours.
On not just mine, everybody else's. JR, get with the program. He's gonna smack me. He's not gonna let me come back for season 3.
We are in season 3, but carry on.
Given how much market is covered in science fiction, why are there so few space opera movies out there? And can you name one?
Naming one, I'll take the easy one and go with Star Wars. I think the reason that there are so few is just they're really expensive to make, or at least to do well. Those special effects don't come cheap, and the big scope and everything typically requires a lot of different sets, and that's a lot of production design.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Dan?
Yeah, I agree. It's the expense, and a few good ones are the first pre-Disney Star Wars films. Denis Villeneuve's Dune looks like it's going to turn out to be really good, but you get a lot more space opera on television than in the movies because they're so expensive, and if studios are going to blow that kind of money, they want something that won't have a script, and so it'll be really easy to sell, like the Marvel films.
Okay. Joe?
I don't know. It's kind of news to me. There's kind of a lack of space opera in film. I mean, I know maybe it's not as big as like Marvel or stuff like that, but Star Wars is huge right now. And also you've got Guardians of the Galaxy, which is Marvel. Yeah. But I mean, there's, I don't know. Now, film is not really my specialty. I'm always behind the trend on movies and stuff. I think I've heard there tends to be more of a lot of, basically just take a franchise and milk it until it, with sequels and stuff.
Oh yeah.
The way film works. I know that Disney, before they bought Star Wars, they tried to do take the old Edgar Rice Burroughs books, the Princess of Mars books, and turn those into a franchise. And that
was actually pretty good.
Yeah, but the
movie, it's a shame. It was pretty good.
Apparently, it bombed really bad, and so it's like they were ready to invest a whole lot of money from what I heard, but like it just did so poorly. They're like, okay, we're gonna do something else, and they bought Star Wars.
Yeah, because Bob Iger thought it would be a good idea to release it as John Carter. No mention of Mars, no mention of anything science fictional, just John Carter everywhere for a series that's 110 years old, and
Well, the other thing about that was that Princess of Mars is one of the older books that kind of invented a lot of the tropes that are space opera. So one thing I heard, and I'll admit I haven't actually seen the movie. I'd like to, but I'm always behind the trend on movies.
It's a good movie, yeah.
Yeah. But the thing with that one was a lot of people complained like, oh, it feels so cliche. And then people who read the books are like, but he invented the cliche. Like, this is what's
right.
happened.
I'll throw out another one for you. Jupiter Ascending.
Yes!
Didn't see that one.
That's one of my favorite movies.
I did.
I liked it.
It was
was
cheesy,
rushed.
but I liked it.
It's so much fun. I'm trying to get us to do. JR was like, let's do one where we talk about a movie. I'm like, and I keep rooting for that one. So much fun.
Okay, but
See, it's a good movie, JR.
okay.
Yeah, it's a great premise.
would-
It's one that should have been a trilogy rather than trying to do one movie.
Yeah, I could see that.
I really wanted it to be a book. I really was hoping it was based off of a book.
So, Terry, what do you think's keeping more of it from coming to the screen?
Money and the fact that you just don't know what the public is going to like. When you go ahead and spend $300 million to make one of these things and it bombs, that really hurts the bottom line. So they're nervous about trying anything that they're not sure or that they're not thinking that they're sure will make a profit.
Are you either? Is anybody familiar with the YouTube channel Dust?
Yes.
Nope.
It's a YouTube channel that does all independent short films in the space opera field. And there's proof that the audience is there and hungry for all kinds of weirdness, because some of their stuff it's like very Hitchcockian in some of the mind games that it plays, and they do it on the cheap. So if you're willing to put the work in, it's there. It's not necessarily a sure thing, but I don't know that as our culture has diverged, anything's a sure thing anymore when it comes to entertainment. I think the days of everybody seeing the only one blockbuster are done.
I think so. Thank goodness.
Yeah, we're in the process of doing a TV pilot script adaptation of my Catechol series, so that'll be getting shopped around soon. So hopefully there'll be some new content going on soon. It has a lot of the stuff that's hot right now, so we'll see what happens to it. But fingers crossed that turns into a thing. Thank you.
That reminds me, I did a terrible injustice. I forgot to include Dan Simmons' Hyperion series as Great Space Opera, or Lois McMaster Bejeweled series. Both of those are come out of the 90s and are fantastic.
The Miles Vorkskind stuff is amazing.
Yes.
I
read Ethan of Athos recently. It was hilarious.
The streaming services, I think, are going to be some game changers if you don't end up with consumer fatigue from now everything is a streaming service. Every time you turn around, somebody else has a new one. So we'll see how that changes things, or if it fades back into it's cheaper to get cable again.
Let's just reboot Gilligan's Island.
No.
It was only a 3-hour tour.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say Gilligan's Island in space actually has some potential now that you mention it.
Well, isn't that Lost in Space, though? Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
And they're rebooting that one on Netflix. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, 2 seasons. They're good.
The nice thing about space opera is you can take basically any story and just say, in space.
True.
All right, so this one I'm not sure is on your list, but what are some of the most iconic books in the field that everybody reading space opera should read? And we'll start with you, Amy.
Dune is really my number one.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah, that's my number one too. My other favorites are Hyperion and the Gap Cycle by Stephen R. Donaldson.
Okay. And what about you, Joe?
I love Dune. But you kind of have to read it 3 times to really get it, and it's kind of dense. I wouldn't start with Dune if you're not familiar with the genre. I'd start with Ender's Game. I think Ender's Game is really good.
Good one. What about you, Terry?
The Miles Vorkskind Saga by Lois McMaster Bejeweled.
I like Terry's taste in books and movies.
Good to know. And what was it? I got the Lois McMaster Bejeweled. What was the name of the series?
The Miles, it may be the Vorkskind Saga. I'm not sure how it's done. How's it pronounced? Is it Vorkosigan?
Vorkosigan.
Yeah. That's correct.
I don't know. I'm not brave enough to mispronounce it in front of Tony Weisgoff.
I dare you. I double dare you.
She's heard me mispronounce so much shit. I don't know why she still talks to me.
All right. And as we bring this puppy to a close, Roundtable, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, all of the contacts will be in the show notes below, dear listener. So, Amy, how can the listeners find you?
So I publish under AK DuBoff, and you can find me at amyduboff.com. And, of course, just searching Amazon for AK DuBoff. And you can also go to catechol.com, and that will take you to the landing page for the Catechol Universe stuff on my main domain.
Okay. Joe? Excuse me, Dan. I almost forgot Dan. Wow.
That's all right. Joe can go first. I don't mind.
Right when you're doing it wrong. Oh, my God.
Repeat after me. A, B, C, D.
That was not on my ads up, all right? I don't want to hear it.
Oh, you can find all of my stuff at jdsawyer.net, and you can listen to my daily podcast for writers about creativity and autodidacticism and general writing stuff at everydaynovelist.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, all the usual places, but yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
All right. Joe?
Cool. Yeah, my website is 1001 Parsecs. Just Google that and you'll find it. I'm Joe Vasicek. You can find my books on Amazon or Goodreads. Best way to follow me is to sign up for my newsletter. I give away a free ebook for people who sign up. And yeah.
All right. And all of that will be in the show notes, as usual, dear listener. And Terry, where can listeners find you? Should you have not offended them already?
Well, if I haven't offended you yet, just rest assured I will get around to you. You can find me for social media. You can find me on Facebook because I think Twitter is just a cesspit and I have no intention of going there. You can find my books on Amazon. You can best find me by going to sign up for my newsletter at terrymixon.com because I also give away a free novella. And that's pictures. Where you can get me. I have pictures.
All right. And you can find us at our website, www.sfshenanigans.com, our Twitter at SFS_show, at Sierra Foxtrot Sierra _show. Our email is podcast@sfshenanigans.com. Any hate mail, however, will be rediverted to Terry Mixon at terrymixon.com. And our Shenanigans Facebook group is facebook.com/groups/SF-Shenanigans.
I'll just send all the hate mail to Paul. That's what I do anyway.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Chris Winder and Cisca Smalls, I'm J.R. Handley, and this was the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time where we'll indulge our love of space and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that archived episode that was in the digital memory hole that we found. We thought you'd enjoy it. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the archive for the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back at our regular scheduled time where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.